Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Greetings and salutations, and welcome to another episode. In the last one, we had a look at how to connect the front end and the back end via an API and a single page application, and this is kind of where we ended up. Now, in this one, I wanted to kind of work a little bit on the UI and dive a little bit deeper into more single page application concepts. So I'm going to open my code editor, and I have both the backend and the front end in front of me here. The backend's on the left hand side here, and it's just serving a data file through the API. And inside of our front end here, we're just building up the site and kind of just consuming that API and creating DOM elements from it. So let's go ahead and continue on. And one of the first things I want to do, excuse me, is to add a few more listings. Now, I'll go to the data file here, and I already copied and created a few more, so I'm just going to paste them in. You can copy the ones that you already wrote in if you followed along, or just add any combination of ID, header, description, price, and image URL. So I'm going to save that and refresh the API. And then we'll take a look at the site here and hit refresh. And now we have a lot more listings. Now they all have the same picture and all of that, but let's not worry too much about that for now. So one thing I want to do is I want to give this container a little more padding. And I also want to have a little more padding on each listing, or margin, excuse me. So let's go ahead and open up our editor, and we'll go to the CSS file in the front end here. And in the listings container, I'm going to go ahead and increase this to 70 and then 0. And the listing in itself will have a margin of 3 pixel and then 0 on the left and right. So going back now, making sure I save that, and then going back, we'll go ahead and refresh. Now we have a little bit of margin on these elements, and we have more padding in the top. So that's what I'm looking for here. Now, one more thing I want to do is I want to make sure that the header lines up with the container here. And in order to do that, we're going to need to add something to the JavaScript here. So now we need the header to have a header container. So you can see I already added it here. So we're just creating an element, and here's a good example of how things can blow up when you're not paying attention. Because here I'm trying to create a DOM element called header container, because obviously I'm an idiot and this is not going to work at all. So let's go ahead and see what happens here. It's not complaining, and I'm a little bit surprised in that. Maybe I didn't actually save the file. Let's see what happens now. All right, so it's just failing silently. Huh. Maybe it is. Let's go ahead and see what happens if I add the div element, which is the correct element. Now we have a header, and oh, I see what's going on. So when you're doing this, you have to keep your tongue straight in your mouth, because otherwise you just end up creating elements that you don't add anywhere. So this header container, it has a we create the div, we add the class list, and then we don't do anything, which obviously that's not going to work. So we need to take the header container, and instead of adding the header text to the header down here, we're going to use the header container. And then we'll take the header and we'll do append child header container. All right. So hopefully now, if we wrote header container here, it would blow up, or I'm going to lose my freaking mind. It doesn't. Wow. So I'm actually allowed to create a header container element. Interesting. I guess it has something to do with web components. Anyway, let's go ahead and don't quote me on that, because I'm actually not certain why I was allowed to create that element. Honestly, I thought it would blow up, but it didn't. So good to know. So now we have our container in here, hopefully. So our div with the class of header container, and that's what we wanted. Now let's go back to Visual Studio Code, go to app CSS, and we'll go ahead and say that the header container has a max width of 1024 pixels, and it has a margin of 0 auto. And if we now refresh, the header listings now lines up a little bit better. So let's go ahead and create a footer as well. And I'm going to do something really ugly right now. And I'm going to copy this. And I'll tell you why in a second. But usually your alarm should go off when you're doing something like this. Twice might be fine. 3 times, definitely not. But let's go ahead and implement it. And then we will go ahead and take a look at why. And then we're going to do a footer container instead of a header container. We'll call it a footer container as well. We'll say footer text. Great. Footer container, footer text, say footer, and we'll append the footer container. Now, let's go ahead and style this. We'll say it'll have the same max width and margin 0 auto, and it's going to have a color of white on the H1, and we'll actually go ahead and make that an H2. And now we need to place it in the DOM. So let's go down here. So here we have render header and we have get listings. Now what's going to happen if I put my footer here? Let's go ahead and check it out. So I'm going to refresh, and it looks like nothing happened, which is not what I expected to happen at all. So let's go ahead and see what I screwed up. So we're creating a div, we're adding the footer, we're creating the footer container, we're adding the footer container, we're creating the footer text, then we're appending footer container and footer text. We're appending the footer we're appending the footer text to the footer container, and we're appending the footer container to the footer. And then on the root element, we're appending. That makes sense. Usually things make sense when you just go through them a little bit. Anyways, so looks like our footer ended up here. Now let's go ahead and style it a little bit so we can see it better. Go ahead and say footer height 100 pixels, adding 10 pixels, margin, nope, background color, 1D, 1D, 1D. All right. Now, we have our footer, but it's in the totally wrong place. But why is this happening? Well, if we take a look at our index.js file, we have render header, get listings, and render footer here. But what is get listings doing? Well, we are fetching here, which is an asynchronous call. And I'm not going to go into much detail here about how asynchronicity works, but what's happening is we're farming this out, and we're saying, tell me when this is done and do something when the action is completed. And we're after that, we're yielding the control back to the program. So we're going here, we're rendering the header, we're going to get listings. Get listings says, well, I need to fetch something from the network, so I am going to do that, and then I'm going to give you control back. So then we are going straight to render footer, which is going to happen before get listing. So let's take this for now, and we'll put that inside of here, and we'll put it after we render the list. And if we now go back and hit refresh, our footer is in the correct place. All right. So one more thing I want to do here is I want to actually create some components. So we'll say header.js, come on. From the root, I want to create source, components, header.js. Thank you. Now let's grab this. We'll export default render header. And we will create another file called footer. And if you're wondering, why we copied the footer, the reason is that I made it similar now, but it's not going to have the same structure if it was a real component. So I could create a general function that created the exact same structure for the footer and the header. But once I want to add more elements to the footer, maybe I want to add a list of social media links or something, then that's not going to work anymore. And I know I could have done the general thing first and then refactored, but in this case, I'm just going to show a few. I want to go a little bit quickly just to show the single page application concepts, because I know that I'm fighting a fight with your attention span and trying to just save a little bit of time. So I'm sorry about that, but it is the way it is. Now, what I did was I created two files. I put the footer in the footer.js file and the header in the header.js file. Now in here, I'm going to import those. Components footer.js. And we'll do import footer from, render footer. And we'll do import render header, source, components, header.js. And let's see what's going on now. It blew up, lo and behold. And root element is not defined. Well, I totally agree with that. And also, I think I might not have shown you this, but I think I put this on in anticipation of this video. But if I remove the module here and hit refresh, you get this error, cannot use import statement outside of a module. And usually I work with React and other frameworks that kind of handle this for you. And it's been a while since I actually imported a module into a plain JS file. But you have to remember to put on this type module, or you're not going to be allowed to import modules into your JS files. But that's totally working in the browser now, which is awesome as well. So just put on the module and then do your imports as you would normally. But we have another problem. I noticed it said root element is not defined, which, by the way, totally agree with that. Makes total sense, and the compiler is rarely wrong. So let's go ahead and see what's going on inside of render footer or render header, or just header, because that's what I named it. All right, so let's go ahead and instead of doing this, we'll do we'll accept the root element here, and we'll do the same thing here. So now we're accepting that as a parameter in render footer and render header. And we're going to go ahead to index.js, and inside of render header, we'll pass in the root element. And also inside of render footer, we're passing the root element. And now if we refresh, we got our page back. All right, so let's see, can we jam a little bit more into this video? Maybe. Let's get started, and if it gets too long, we'll cut it short. But I want to take a look at routing. So we're in the client side now, which means that we have to be able to listen to changes in this. So there's something called history, which keeps track of which paths and domains you're on. So let's go ahead and take a look at the history object first. We'll go ahead and we'll console log history. And if we do that, we get a object with the history length 2 scroll restoration auto state 0. All right, so let's also go ahead and console log the location, which is going to be the object that holds the information about the domain. So looking at this, we have a path name. All right, so that's useful. Now, if we do console log, if we add something here, like hello, I'm going to say, yeah, that makes sense, because we need to be able to listen in on that. Now, honestly, it's been a while since I did this, so I'm not sure if I remember it precisely, but we'll always figure it out. That's what we do as engineers. We just feel stupid all the time, and then we figure things out. So let's go ahead. I think what I want to do is I want to listen on something called pop states. So window or pop state MDN. And that's going to say all right, so after new location is loaded, displayed, made visible, and when the transition either due to use triggering the back button or otherwise. All right, so let's go ahead and do window add event listener pop state, and we'll accept E. We'll do E prevent default. We'll console log E. We'll console log location. We'll console, yeah, that's it for now. So let's go ahead and say hello. All right. So still we need to be able to write. So let's go ahead and do this. Since I'm doing it in the browser now, and that's causing a full page reload. And that page reload is sending an HTTP request to my server at the path /hello. Now, we don't have anything at that path, so that's always going to fail. But what we can do, let's just go ahead and history listen. I'm just gonna try, and if it doesn't work, we'll find another path. But let's go ahead and say on the listing, we're going to add event listener. Click, and on click, we want to prevent the default behavior. Want to do history push, and nothing. And we're gonna send it to the root, and it's going to be the listing ID. All right. So now I thought I would be able to, let's see, console log, clicking. Right, so that's working. Let me check. Did I get this wrong? Play state, is that it? All right. To manipulate history, JavaScript. Yeah, that's what I wanted. Modifying browser history with JavaScript. So push state and replace state. Page 2. Just gonna try this, see if that works. It doesn't. So why isn't this giving me what I want? Let's try and put page 2 here. There we go. So there we have the route. So I think listing ID, and yeah, that I know that's not going to work. All right, so again, it's late and I'm an idiot because the listing is not the object that's on the listing data. The listing is the actual DOM element, which is pretty basic and, to be honest, pretty stupid. So let's go ahead and do this the right way. So let's say listing data ID. That, and I know that's not going to work. Now we click these, we get the different IDs. So let's go ahead and carry on just for a few more minutes and then we're done, I promise. So let's see what's happening in the pop states. Nothing. But we can actually handle it down here. So what we want to do is we want to push the ID, which we're doing. Then we want to read that and want to create a router that reads it and then renders a page. Okay, so let's go ahead and create a const main page equals async. And let's see if we can get this right. We want to render header, get the listings, and we'll have a wait here. And then we'll render the footer. And we'll call that main page. All right, not exactly what I wanted. Let's keep it like this for now. And we want to create a const render main page. Render single listing. Remove the async here for now, don't need that. And we'll say render header root elements. We'll say render footer root element. And then in here we'll have render single listing. And we'll create const render single listing. All right, and now we want to create a router. And or let's just call it route. So we'll call the route function here. And we'll call it here as well. So if we'll go ahead and get the location. So we'll get the path, location path, and if the path equals 0 slash or root, we'll render main page. Else, if path equals okay, so if the path length is greater than, say, 1. There are numerous ways we could do this. And this is not very robust, but I think it'll work for now. Single page, and we'll go ahead and we'll get the ID. So ID equals path, and then path length -1. And then we'll console log the ID. That's going to be passed into the render single page. We'll make it a number as well. And the single listing will get the listing is going to be equal listing data. Find, and we'll take the ID that we get in. That ID is going to be used in order to find the correct listing. So we're going to item, and then we'll return item ID that equals the ID. And then we'll just create header equals document, create element h1. And let's do h2 actually. And header text content is going to be equal to listing. And what did we call header? Let's do that. Oops. So that's going to be equal to the listing header. And then what we'll do is we'll take the root element and we'll add append child of header. And I know that's confusing because we already have a header. So let's call it body content. And we'll just change these. All right, we just did a lot of things. So let's see if any of it works. And it blows up. Render single listing has already been declared. Render single listing. Yeah. So get single listing. Going to be this one. And we will pass in the ID that we receive. And the render single listing will be this function. And what blows out now, can read property length of undefined at route. So go ahead and console log the path. And looks like we can't read the length of undefined at index 91. All right, so let's go ahead and console log the path here, which is going to be a string, I believe. It's going to be undefined. So, okay, that makes sense. Because what is location here? There we go. Path name. Thank you. Location dot path name. And now we'll have the slash. Now we have our main page here. And our footer. And what happens if we click this? We get /1 and we get ID is not defined. Why do we get ID is not defined? We're passing it to render single listing, which takes the ID, that sends the ID to get single listing. Let's go ahead and check. Yeah, that makes sense because we commented that out. Thank you, stupid. And that doesn't work because remember we're doing that full page refresh. And now listing data is not defined. Okay. So what's happening? Right. So we only have that inside of here. So let's go ahead and say var listing data or const. That listing data is empty. And then once we get the data, we'll actually set that to our variable. And now we have another problem. So that's what happens when you do a lot of changes in one go, because you're running short of time. But we're going to say const listing equals, and that's going to make a little more sense, I believe. And now we have the ID of 1 in our index.js on 97. We're passing that to render single listing. And what we need to do is we need to clear our page. So root element and now so what we want to do is we want to get I want to create a function to clear main page, which is going to be const clear main page document query selector. We'll say element, and it's going to be document query selector and the listing container. So we'll grab that and then we'll say root element remove child element, and then we'll render the header again, get the single listing, render the footer, and we'll give this a container as well. Const container equals document create element div, gonna class list add single listing container, and then we'll add the container append child for the content, and we'll add the container to the root element, and let's just give it a quick little styling. We'll put it down here. So height 100 ph, margin 0 auto, and we'll say max width 1024 pixels. And now if we refresh our page, we click on one of the listings, right? So we get our footer and header double up, and that's because we just removed the actual main page. So let's do clear page, and let's see in our index HTML, we're gonna get the let's just do it like this. Clear main page, that's const clear header, and we're gonna const clear footer. So this is going to be, let's do one clear element, and we will do const clear main page, and we'll go ahead and we'll use that clear element function to take in a class, and we'll do this here, and then we'll do clear element, clear the listings container, we'll do clear element on the header, and we'll do clear element on the footer. And now we're clearing the main page and we're re-rendering. So if we now go back to our root, and thank you very much. Class name. Because a class is a restricted keyword in JavaScript. Now, we have our listings. We click one of them, and we get our new page. I know that that was a lot of information to take in, and it probably went really quick, and I made a ton of mistakes because I just wanted to try to show you this, and it just ended up being a really, really long video, and doing something that, quite frankly, I haven't done a lot before, because you always get the tools just handed to you, don't you? And you don't always take the time or have the time to go in and figure out how things work under the hood. Now, I like to do that, and I hope you do as well. And I hope that you found this useful on some level. It's always fun to kind of be able to do this stuff on your own and see kind of how much work you actually have to do to get what the framework and the tools give you for free. But you know, it's always fun to play around. So hopefully you enjoyed this, and I'll see you in the next video. Thanks for tuning in, guys. Bye bye.